to Ethoria Channel.
You believe you are free. This morning you chose coffee over tea, black shirt over blue. The route to work that avoids traffic. Small choices maybe, but they feel like yours. Your boss criticizes your project, your chest tightens, anger floods your system. But you choose to smile and nod instead of exploding. Later, scrolling your phone, you see that ex who broke your heart posting happy photos with someone new. The familiar ache returns. You choose to keep scrolling, but the hurt follows you for hours. But what if I told you that this very belief in your freedom, this illusion that you're the author of these responses, is the greatest prison you have ever constructed? 350 years ago, a lens grinder in Amsterdam discovered something that would shatter every comfortable lie humanity tells itself about choice, about God, about the very nature of existence itself. His name was Baruch Spinoza, and he understood something that most people spend their entire lives running from. What if everything you think you control is actually controlling you? Today, you will meet a philosopher who was excommunicated from his own community, banned from his synagogue, cursed with the most severe form of religious exile possible. Why? Because he dared to suggest that God and nature are the same thing, that your emotions are not mysterious forces, but mechanical laws as predictable as gravity. That freedom, real freedom, comes not from fighting the current of existence, but from understanding it so completely that you become the current itself. You are about to discover why Spinoza's ethics isn't just philosophy. It's surgery for the soul, and the operation begins now. The lens grinder's vision. Picture this: Amsterdam, 1656. A young man sits in the flickering candlelight, grinding lenses with mathematical precision. Each curve he creates brings distant stars closer, makes the invisible visible. But Baruch Spinoza is grinding more than glass. He is grinding away the illusions that separate humans from truth. You see, while his contemporaries argued about whether God exists, Spinoza asked a far more dangerous question. What if God isn't separate from the world at all? What if God is the world? Every atom, every breath, every thought you think you're thinking right now? What if the sacred and the scientific are the same thing? This is why they cast him out. This is why his own community declared him dead while he still breathed. Because Spinoza had committed the ultimate heresy. He had made the divine logical, visual, a man walking alone through empty streets, his shadow stretching long behind him. But here's what his persecutors didn't understand, and what you're about to discover. Spinoza wasn't destroying God. He was revealing God in every grain of sand, every human tear, every mathematical equation that governs the movement of planets and the beating of your heart. When you understand Spinoza, you understand that you are not separate from the universe. You are the universe, temporarily organized into the pattern you call yourself. And this changes everything. The geometry of emotions. Most philosophy asks you to think differently. Spinoza demands that you feel differently. His masterwork, the Ethics, is written like a geometry textbook. Definitions, axioms, propositions, proofs, as if human emotions were triangles to be measured, forces to be calculated. Sounds boring, right? Whole, mechanical, Wrong. Here's what Sarah, a philosophy student, discovered. I thought Spinoza was just some dead guy with boring math. Then my boyfriend cheated on me. I was destroyed, obsessing over every detail, every sign I'd missed. My friend handed me the ethics and said, "Try this." At first I was like, seriously? Geometry for heartbreak? But then I started seeing patterns. My jealousy wasn't random. My rage followed precise rules. My obsessive thinking was as predictable as gravity. For the first time, I wasn't drowning in chaos. I was seeing the map. You see, Spinoza chose geometry because he understood something that escapes most people. Your emotions are not mysterious storms that sweep through your consciousness without warning. They are natural phenomena, as governed by laws as the orbit of planets. Why do you suffer the same patterns of pain again and again? Because you treat your emotions like weather, something that happens to you, rather than something that follows precise, discoverable rules. Spinoza saw through this illusion. He recognized that every feeling you experience emerges from one fundamental drive, one cosmic force that runs through all of existence. Conatus. The effort by which each thing endeavors to persist in its being. You are not just alive. You are life itself, temporarily concentrated into the form you call your name, your story, your identity. And everything you do, every choice, every fear, every moment of joy or despair flows from this single unstoppable force trying to maintain and expand itself. But here's where it gets dangerous. Most people never recognize their own conatus. They confuse it with ego, with desire, with the endless hunger for more, more, more. They mistake the shadow for the light. The bondage of passion, you live in bondage. Not the obvious kind, though perhaps that too. You live in the bondage of inadequate ideas, partial understanding, emotional reactions that control you like a puppet dancing to strings you cannot see. Spinoza called this the realm of passive affects. You are not acting, you are being acted upon. Every burst of anger, every wave of sadness, every spike of fear is your conatus responding to forces you do not understand, through patterns you have never examined. When was the last time you chose your emotional response instead of being chosen by it? Picture this. Your coworker throws you under the bus in the meeting. Everyone's looking. Your face burns with humiliation. In that moment, most people experience one of two things. Option A, explosion. You fire back, defend yourself, maybe even attack them personally. Later you feel justified, but somehow empty. Option B, implosion. You smile tightly, say nothing, then spend the next 3 days replaying the scene, crafting perfect comebacks you'll never deliver. Spinoza would say you're missing option C, understanding. What if, in that burning moment, you could see the precise mechanics at work? Your co-worker's action triggered your fear of social rejection. That fear activated your fight or flight response. Your conatus, your life force, perceived a threat to your reputation, your job security, your social standing. None of this is personal. None of this is mystical. It's as mechanical as dominoes falling. And once you see the dominoes, you can start arranging them differently. Spinoza would say you were neither. You were a necessary link in an infinite chain of causes and effects, playing out the only way they could possibly play out, given the nature of reality itself. This is not fatalism. This is something far more radical. It is the recognition that your freedom lies not in escaping causation, but in understanding it so completely that you become a conscious participant in the cosmic dance, rather than an unconscious victim of it. But to reach this understanding, you must first face the shadow that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The shadow of your own illusions about control. The illusion of free will. You have never made a free choice in your life. Pause. Breathe. I know that stings, not because you are weak, not because you are flawed, but because freedom, as you understand it, is a conceptual mistake. Marcus, a business executive, put it this way: I used to think I was the king of my decisions. CEO mindset, you know? Then I started tracking my choices. What I ate, who I called, how I reacted to stress. Turns out, 90% of my decisions were just yesterday's decisions on repeat. I was a machine running the same program, calling it choice. When you think you are choosing between chocolate and vanilla, you experience the sensation of deliberation, the weighing of options, the moment of decision. But where did your preference for chocolate come from? Your grandmother's cookies when you were 7. The dopamine pathways carved by thousands of previous experiences. The marketing messages absorbed subconsciously. The blood sugar level in this precise moment. The cultural associations you've never questioned. Trace any choice back far enough, and you find an infinite web of causes that were themselves caused by other causes, reaching back to the beginning of time itself. If your thoughts think themselves, who exactly is the thinker? This is not a comfortable realization. It dissolves the ego, the sense of being a separate agent moving through the world, making things happen through the sheer force of will. But Spinoza offers something in return for this dissolution, something far more precious than the illusion of control, the possibility of actual understanding. When you stop trying to be the author of reality and start learning to read the script that was always already being written, you discover something extraordinary. You are not separate from the author. You are the author, in the same way that a wave is not separate from the ocean. The nature of God and nature God does not exist. God is existence. This is Spinoza's most radical insight, the one that got him excommunicated, the one that makes religious fundamentalists and materialist atheists equally uncomfortable. God and nature are two names for the same thing. Not because God is natural, but because nature is divine. Every law of physics is a thought in the mind of God. Every chemical reaction is an act of divine creativity. Every moment of your experience is a mode of infinite being, temporarily expressing itself through the finite pattern you call your life. What if the sacred is not separate from the world, but is the very fabric of the world itself? This changes how you see everything. The tree outside your window is not just a biological organism, it is God being a tree. Your thoughts right now are not just neurological events. They are God thinking through the temporary vortex of consciousness you call yourself. You are not in the universe, you are the universe, localized. But here's what most people miss about Spinoza's vision. This doesn't make you God in the egotistical sense. It dissolves the ego entirely. If everything is God, then nothing is special in the way the ego wants to be special. And yet, everything becomes sacred in a way the ego could never imagine. The ethics of joy. If you are not free in the way you think you are, how then should you live? Spinoza's answer is both simple and revolutionary. Follow your joy. Not pleasure, that's different. Let me explain with something you'll recognize. You get a notification. Dopamine hits. You feel good for 30 seconds, then immediately need another hit. That's pleasure. Brief, external, ultimately empty. But remember the last time you solved a problem that really mattered to you, or had a conversation that left you feeling more alive than before, or created something that expressed who you really are. That expansion, that sense of growth, that feeling of becoming more yourself, that's joy. Joy is your essential life force recognizing its own expansion. Lisa, a teacher, described it this way. I used to chase happiness through shopping, through dates that went nowhere, through scrolling until 2 a.m. Always felt depleted afterward. Then I started paying attention to what actually made me feel more alive. Turns out it was helping my struggling students break through to understanding, designing lessons that worked, seeing that light bulb moment. I wasn't just happy, I was becoming more me. But here's the crucial point. You cannot fake this transition. You cannot think your way into joy or will yourself into wisdom. Why do you seek happiness in things that consistently make you miserable? Because you have confused pleasure with joy, acquisition with expansion, having with being. But when you understand what actually serves your deepest flourishing, when you align with the force that naturally wants to grow through you, something extraordinary happens. You stop fighting yourself. You start dancing with reality. This is what Spinoza called the mind's recognition of its own divine nature, not worship of some external god, but the profound love that emerges when intelligence recognizes itself in everything it encounters. The common notions, you are not alone. This seems obvious, but Spinoza understood it in a way that most people never grasp. You share more with other people than what separates you. He called these shared elements common notions, the aspects of human nature that are universal, that allow for genuine understanding and cooperation between individuals. Your conatus and my conatus are not in fundamental competition. They are expressions of the same cosmic force, temporarily organized into different patterns. When you truly understand this, not just intellectually, but experientially, something shifts. The zero-sum game that dominates most human relationships reveals itself as an illusion. What if your flourishing and my flourishing are the same flourishing, seen from different angles? This is the foundation of Spinoza's ethics, not rules imposed from outside, but the natural flowering of understanding. When you see clearly how interconnected you are with everything else, harmful actions become as impossible as deliberately cutting off your own hand. Not because you become morally perfect, but because you recognize that harming others is literally harming yourself, not metaphorically, but as a matter of ontological fact. You and I are modes of the same substance, waves in the same ocean, thoughts in the same infinite mind. The transformation of suffering Spinoza does not promise to eliminate suffering. He offers something far more radical, the transformation of suffering into understanding. Here's what that looks like in practice. Your partner breaks up with you. The pain is crushing. Most people either numb out, Netflix, alcohol, rebound relationships, get lost in the story. They're terrible, you're terrible, love is impossible. But there's a third option. You could ask, what is this pain teaching me? Maybe it's showing you that you'd lost yourself in the relationship. Maybe it's revealing patterns you inherited from watching your parents. Maybe it's your life force recognizing that this connection wasn't serving your deepest growth. David, a software engineer, told me, when my marriage ended, I was destroyed. Then I started treating my heartbreak like a debugging process. What conditions led to this crash? What assumptions was I making that turned out to be false? What patterns kept repeating? It didn't make the pain go away, but it made it useful. I learned more about myself in 6 months than I had in 6 years. Every moment of sadness, every spike of anxiety, every wave of anger is information about how you are positioned in the web of relationships that constitute reality. What if your pain is not a punishment, but a teacher? This doesn't make the pain pleasant, but it makes it meaningful. And meaning, Spinoza understood, is the difference between suffering and growth. But let's be honest, sometimes this feels impossible. Sometimes the pain is so overwhelming that the idea of learning from it sounds like spiritual bypassing. Sometimes you just want it to stop. Spinoza knew this. He never pretended. That understanding eliminates the difficulty of being human. He just knew that understanding changes your relationship to that difficulty. You stop being the victim of your circumstances and become their student. The intellectual love of God. At the pinnacle of Spinoza's system lies an idea so radical that most commentators either ignore it or explain it away. The intellectual love of God. This is not religious sentiment. This is not mystical experience in the traditional sense. This is the natural result of understanding reality so completely that the boundary between knower and known dissolves. When you truly understand the necessity that governs all things, when you see how your own existence fits into the infinite pattern of cause and effect, when you recognize your conatus as an expression of the cosmic force that drives all existence, something unprecedented happens. You fall in love with reality itself, not because reality is always pleasant, it isn't, but because reality is always perfect in the sense of being exactly what it must be, given the infinite complexity of factors that produce each moment. What if acceptance is not resignation, but the highest form of love? This love is not passive. It is the most active thing possible. The universe loving itself through your understanding, reality celebrating its own infinite creativity through your finite perspective. You become God's way of understanding God, not as an external observer, but as a temporary concentration of the divine intelligence that constitutes all things. Freedom through necessity. Here is the paradox at the heart of Spinoza's philosophy. True freedom comes through the complete acceptance of necessity. You are not free to be other than what you are, but you are free to understand what you are so completely that the distinction between freedom and necessity dissolves. A river is not free to flow uphill, but in flowing downhill, it expresses its nature so perfectly that we experience its movement as graceful, powerful, beautiful. The river is most itself when it follows the laws that govern its existence. You are like that river. You cannot escape the laws of your nature, psychological, biological, social, cosmic, but you can understand those laws so completely that following them becomes an art form rather than a burden. What if the cage you've been trying to escape is actually the shape of your wings? This is what Spinoza meant by freedom, not the ability to do whatever you want, but the power to act from your own nature rather than being pushed around by external forces you don't understand. When you understand why you do what you do, when you see the patterns that govern your desires and fears, when you recognize the cosmic forces operating through your personal existence, you stop being a victim of circumstances and become their conscious expression. This is not resignation. This is mastery of the highest order. The eternity of the mind-death is not what you think it is. Spinoza makes a distinction that most people miss between duration and eternity. Your body exists in duration. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But your mind, insofar as it consists of eternal truths, participates in eternity itself. The mathematical relationships you understand, the logical connections you grasp, the universal patterns you recognize. These are not personal possessions that die with your brain. They are aspects of the eternal structure of reality itself. When you understand a truth, you don't just have a thought about that truth. You become that truth, temporarily. The boundary between your mind and the eternal mind of nature dissolves. What if death is not the opposite of life, but simply a different form of the same eternal existence? This is not personal immortality in the traditional sense. Your ego, your personality, your memories, these belong to duration and will pass away. But whatever in you participates in eternal truth, whatever in you has merged with the infinite intelligence that constitutes reality, this cannot die because it was never born. It simply is. You are not just in eternity. Eternity is in you. And understanding this changes how you live every moment of your temporary existence. The practice of philosophy. Spinoza's Ethics is not just a book to be read. It is a practice to be lived. Every day, you have countless opportunities to choose between adequate and inadequate ideas, between active and passive affects, between understanding and confusion. Every moment of anger is a chance to investigate the causes behind your emotional response. Every wave of sadness is an opportunity to understand how your conatus is encountering resistance. Every spike of joy is a signal that you are moving toward greater understanding and power. The practice is simple in concept, revolutionary in application. Treat your life as a laboratory for understanding the laws that govern human existence. When did you last examine your assumptions about what you think you know? Most people live their entire lives on autopilot, reacting to circumstances through patterns they never question, driven by desires they never examine, trapped in emotional loops they never escape. Spinoza offers a different possibility: the examined life, lived with full awareness of the forces that shape your experience. This doesn't make life easier. In some ways, it makes life more difficult. Ignorance can be blissful. Understanding often comes with responsibilities that comfort cannot bear, but it makes life real in a way that nothing else can. The social dimension: you cannot practice Spinoza's philosophy alone. This might seem paradoxical given his emphasis on individual understanding and rational self-determination. But Spinoza understood something that pure individualists miss. You are fundamentally social beings, constituted by your relationships as much as by your isolated thoughts. Your conatus is not separate from other people's conatus. It is enhanced or diminished by the quality of your connections with others. When you surround yourself with people who are driven by fear, superstition, and inadequate ideas, your own capacity for clear thinking is diminished. When you connect with people who are committed to understanding and growth, your own power of acting is enhanced. Who in your life enhances your capacity for joy and who diminishes it? This is not about surrounding yourself with people who always agree with you or make you feel comfortable. It's about recognizing which relationships support your development as a rational, understanding being, and which relationships trap you in patterns of reactivity and confusion. Spinoza's ideal community would be composed of individuals who have learned to align their personal flourishing with the flourishing of the whole, not through self-sacrifice, but through the recognition that individual and collective well-being are ultimately the same thing. The transformation of religion, Spinoza was excommunicated for destroying religion, but in reality, he was transforming it. Traditional religion asks you to believe without understanding, to have faith in propositions that contradict reason, to split your life between the sacred and the secular. Spinoza's religion, if we can call it that, is the exact opposite. It asks you to understand as completely as possible, to trust reason as the highest faculty you possess, to recognize the sacred in every aspect of existence. Prayer becomes contemplation, worship becomes understanding, salvation becomes the recognition of your eternal nature. What if religion at its highest is not about believing impossible things, but about seeing clearly the miraculous nature of ordinary existence? This doesn't eliminate mystery. If anything, it deepens mystery by revealing how little you understand about the infinite complexity of reality. But it makes mystery an invitation to investigation, rather than a demand for blind submission. The God of Spinoza's philosophy doesn't require your worship. This God is your capacity for understanding, your drive toward truth, your recognition of the sacred dimension of existence itself. You don't need to believe in this God. You need to become this God, or rather, to recognize that you already are this God, temporarily forgetting your own divine nature. The challenge of living philosophically, understanding Spinoza intellectually is one thing. Living according to his insights is something else entirely. Let's be honest here. You can read every philosophy book ever written and still lose your mind when someone cuts you off in traffic. You can understand the illusion of control and still check your phone obsessively waiting for that text back. You can grasp the logic of interconnectedness and still feel utterly alone on a Tuesday night. This gap isn't failure, it's human. Rachel, a therapist, put it perfectly. I teach people about emotional regulation all day. Then I go home and yell at my teenager for leaving dishes in the sink. The irony wasn't lost on me. But Spinoza helped me see that even my hypocrisy was following predictable patterns. I was depleted from giving all day, triggered by the mess that represented lack of respect, reacting from old patterns about being responsible for everyone. Once I saw the mechanism, I could start working with it instead of being ashamed of it. The gap between philosophical understanding and embodied wisdom is where most people get stuck. Spinoza never claimed that understanding automatically transforms behavior. He understood that intellectual insight must be integrated slowly, through practice, through the gradual alignment of your daily choices with your deepest understanding. How often do you act against your own best understanding of what would serve your highest good? This question is not meant to induce guilt. It's meant to highlight the complexity of human transformation. Knowing what is true and living what is true are different orders of activity. The practice of Spinozist philosophy is the practice of narrowing this gap slowly and patiently through the cultivation of what he called strength of mind, the capacity to act from understanding rather than being pushed around by circumstances. This is not achieved through willpower alone. It is achieved through the gradual transformation of your relationship to your own experience. The politics of understanding. Individual transformation and social transformation are not separate processes. Spinoza understood that the quality of your inner life and the quality of your social environment are intimately connected. A society composed of individuals who are driven by fear, superstition, and inadequate ideas will necessarily produce institutions that reflect these limitations. Conversely, as individuals develop their capacity for understanding and rational self-determination, the possibility emerges for social arrangements that support human flourishing rather than merely controlling human behavior. This is why Spinoza's political philosophy is not about finding the perfect form of government, but about creating conditions in which people can develop their rational capacities and live according to their nature, rather than being forced into patterns that contradict their deepest needs. What kind of society would emerge if people were educated to understand their emotions rather than being manipulated by them? This is not utopian thinking. It is practical philosophy applied to the problem of collective human existence. The same principles that govern individual development, the cultivation of understanding, the transformation of passive affects into active ones, the recognition of common interests apply to communities and societies. But social transformation begins with individual transformation. You cannot create what you have not become. The aesthetic dimension. Beauty, for Spinoza, is not decoration, it is recognition. When you encounter something beautiful, a piece of music, a mathematical proof, a moment of perfect understanding between two people, you are recognizing the harmony that underlies apparent complexity, the pattern that connects what seemed separate. Beauty is your conatus recognizing its own highest possibilities reflected in the world around you. This is why exposure to genuine beauty is not luxury, but necessity. It trains your capacity to recognize the deeper patterns that govern existence, to see through surface chaos to underlying order, to experience the joy that comes from understanding. When was the last time you encountered beauty that changed how you see the world? Most people live in environments that are aesthetically impoverished, not because they lack money, but because they lack the understanding that beauty is essential to human development. Spinoza would say that surrounding yourself with genuine beauty is not self-indulgence but self-education. It develops your capacity to perceive the divine intelligence that expresses itself through all forms of existence. Art at its highest becomes philosophy made visible. Philosophy at its highest becomes art made logical. The question of evil. If everything that exists is a necessary expression of divine nature, what about evil? This is the question that troubles everyone who encounters Spinoza's system. If God and nature are the same thing, if everything follows necessarily from the laws of existence, how do you account for suffering, cruelty, injustice? Spinoza's answer is both profound and disturbing. Evil is not a positive force, but a form of ignorance. When people act in ways that cause harm, they are acting from inadequate ideas about their own nature and their relationship to others. They are confusing their temporary, separate existence with their fundamental reality as expressions of the same cosmic force. What if the people who cause the most harm are actually the people who are most confused about their own nature? This doesn't excuse harmful behavior, it explains it. And in explaining it, it opens the possibility for transformation rather than merely punishment. The person who acts from hatred is not evil in some metaphysical sense. They are someone whose conatus has become confused about how to preserve and enhance itself. They are trying to increase their own power by diminishing others, not recognizing that in the long run, this strategy defeats itself. Understanding this doesn't make you passive in the face of harm, but it changes your relationship to those who cause harm, and it changes your understanding of what justice might actually look like. The discipline of attention. Everything in Spinoza's philosophy comes down to one fundamental capacity: the ability to pay attention. Attention to your emotional patterns, attention to the causes behind your thoughts, attention to the relationships that shape your experience, attention to the infinite web of connections that constitute each moment of existence. Most people live in a state of chronic inattention, carried along by habits they never examine, reacting to situations through patterns they never question, driven by forces they never investigate. The practice of philosophy, for Spinoza, is the practice of attention, sustained, disciplined, patient attention to what is actually happening, as opposed to what you think is happening or what you wish were happening. How much of your life do you experience directly, and how much through the filter of your assumptions about what you think you already know? This question goes to the heart of human unconsciousness. Most experience is filtered through preconceptions, expectations, defensive patterns, wishful thinking. Very little is encountered directly. Spinoza's path to freedom is the path of direct encounter with your emotions, with other people, with the natural world, with the cosmic forces that operate through your individual existence. This requires a quality of attention that most people have never developed. It requires the willingness to see what is actually there rather than what you want to be there. The integration of opposites. One of the most sophisticated aspects of Spinoza's thinking is his refusal to eliminate contradiction through false resolution. Mind and body are not separate, but they are also not the same. They are two aspects of one reality, like the concave and convex sides of a curve. Freedom and necessity are not opposites, but they are also not identical. Freedom is necessity understood and embraced. Individual and universal are not in conflict, but they are also not simply merged. The individual is the universal expressing itself through a particular pattern of organization. What if the tensions you try to resolve by choosing one side or the other are actually meant to be held in dynamic balance? Most people try to solve the fundamental paradoxes of existence by eliminating one pole or the other. Spinoza suggests that the paradoxes are not problems to be solved, but realities to be understood and integrated. You are simultaneously free and determined, individual and universal, finite and infinite, temporal and eternal. The task is not to choose which of these descriptions is correct, but to understand how they can all be true at the same time. This requires a more subtle form of thinking than most people are used to, thinking that can hold complexity without collapsing it into simplicity, thinking that can embrace paradox without being paralyzed by it. The ecology of mind. Your mind is not contained within your skull. This might sound mystical, but for Spinoza it is a matter of logical necessity. If mind and body are two aspects of the same thing, and if your body is intimately connected with the environment that sustains it, then your mind must also extend beyond the boundaries of your physical organism. You think with your whole environment, the air you breathe, the food you eat, the relationships you maintain, the cultural patterns you inherit, the natural systems that support your existence. What if intelligence is not something you have, but something you participate in? This changes how you think about thinking itself. Instead of imagining your mind as a private container filled with personal thoughts, you begin to recognize it as a temporary organization of intelligence that extends throughout the natural world. Your best thoughts are not yours in the possessive sense. They are moments when you become transparent to the cosmic intelligence that operates through all things. Your worst thoughts, the patterns of fear, confusion, and inadequate understanding that cause suffering, are moments when you lose touch with this larger intelligence and get trapped in the limitations of your temporary, separate existence. The practice is learning to align your individual thinking with the patterns of intelligence that govern the whole system of which you are a part. The ethics of understanding. Ethics, for Spinoza, is not about following rules or maximizing outcomes. It is about the quality of understanding that informs your actions. When you act from clear understanding of your nature and circumstances, you naturally act in ways that enhance rather than diminish the flourishing of the whole system of which you are a part. When you act from confusion, fear, or inadequate ideas, you naturally act in ways that create suffering for yourself and others. The ethical question is not, what should I do? But how clearly do I understand the situation in which I find myself? What if moral behavior is not about following external rules, but about developing internal clarity? This makes ethics much more demanding than conventional morality. It's easier to follow a list of commandments than to develop the quality of attention and understanding that naturally gives rise to beneficial action. But it also makes ethics much more reliable. Actions based on rules can be manipulated, rationalized, applied selectively. Actions based on understanding arise spontaneously from the nature of the situation itself. When you truly understand how interconnected you are with everything else, harmful actions become as unlikely as deliberately harming yourself. This is not because you become morally perfect, but because you recognize that the distinction between self and other is less absolute than it appears. The temporality of eternity. You exist in time, but you also participate in eternity. Every moment of genuine understanding is a moment in which you transcend the limitations of temporal existence without leaving time behind. When you grasp a mathematical truth, you are not just having a thought that happens to occur at a particular moment. You are participating in a pattern of relationships that is timeless, that would be true regardless of when or where or by whom it is understood. What if the most important parts of your experience are the parts that connect you with what is eternal? This is not about escaping time or transcending the physical world. It is about recognizing the eternal dimension that is present within temporal experience. Your body ages and will die. Your personality changes and will eventually dissolve. But your capacity for understanding, your recognition of truth, your participation in the cosmic intelligence that governs all things, this has a reality that transcends the boundaries of your individual existence. Living with awareness of this eternal dimension doesn't make you otherworldly. It makes you more present to the sacred dimension of ordinary experience. Every moment becomes an opportunity to participate consciously in the eternal creativity that expresses itself through the temporal world. The community of understanding philosophy is not a solitary activity. Even when you think alone, you are thinking with and through the insights of others who have grappled with the same fundamental questions that concern you. Spinoza's own thinking was shaped by his dialogue with predecessors, like Descartes, and contemporaries like Hobbes. Even when he disagreed with them, his insights emerged from participation in a community of inquiry that extended across time and culture. Who are the thinkers, living and dead, who help you think more clearly about the questions that matter most to you? This is not about academic credentials or formal philosophical training. It is about recognizing that the development of understanding is always a collaborative process, even when it happens in solitude. The books you read, the conversations you have, the examples of clarity and wisdom you encounter, these become part of the community that supports your own development. And your own insights, however modest, become part of the community that supports others in their development. Understanding grows through sharing, through the mutual enhancement that occurs when minds that are committed to truth encounter each other in the spirit of genuine inquiry. The patience of transformation. Nothing that is worthwhile happens quickly. This is especially true of the kind of transformation that Spinoza's philosophy makes possible. The shift from passive to active affects, from inadequate to adequate, ideas from emotional reactivity to understanding. This unfolds over years and decades, not days and weeks. Most people give up too soon. They expect philosophical insight to translate immediately into behavioral change, or they expect understanding to eliminate the basic challenges of human existence. What if the point is not to solve the problems of existence, but to transform your relationship to those problems? Spinoza himself lived his philosophy for only 44 years before his death, and even he did not claim to have achieved the ideal of human development that his system describes. The path he outlines is not a destination to be reached, but a direction to be followed. Not a problem to be solved, but a way of engaging with the fundamental mysteries of existence. The transformation happens gradually, through the accumulation of small shifts in understanding, through the slow development of new capacities for attention and response, through the patient cultivation of what he called strength of mind. There are no shortcuts, but there is also no end to the possibilities for growth and understanding that open up along the way. The courage of truth. Living according to Spinoza's insights requires a particular kind of courage. The courage to face the implications of your interconnectedness with everything else, which eliminates the possibility of ultimate isolation, but also eliminates the illusion of ultimate control. The courage to recognize that your freedom lies not in escaping the laws of nature, but in understanding them so completely that following them becomes an expression of your deepest nature rather than a constraint upon it. The courage to see that your emotions are not mysterious forces that happen to you, but natural phenomena that follow discoverable patterns and can be understood, and, through understanding, transformed. What truths about yourself and your life are you avoiding because they would require you to change in ways that frighten you? This question goes to the heart of why Spinoza's philosophy remains challenging even for those who are intellectually convinced by its arguments. Understanding the truth is one thing. Having the courage to live according to that understanding is something else entirely. The truth about your nature, your relationships, your place in the cosmic order. This truth is liberating, but it is also demanding. It requires you to give up comfortable illusions and take responsibility for your participation in the unfolding of reality itself. Most people prefer familiar suffering to unfamiliar freedom. Spinoza offers unfamiliar freedom with all the uncertainty and responsibility that such freedom entails. The art of living. At its deepest level, Spinoza's philosophy is not about thinking, but about living. It is the art of living as a conscious expression of the cosmic intelligence that governs all things, rather than as a victim of forces you do not understand. This art cannot be learned through study alone. It must be practiced, refined, embodied through the countless small choices that make up a human life. How you respond to frustration, how you navigate relationships, how you work with your desires and fears, how you relate to success and failure, pleasure and pain, gain and loss. Every moment offers an opportunity to practice the art of living according to your nature rather than against it, in harmony with the larger patterns of which you are a part, rather than in futile opposition to them. What if your life is not a problem to be solved, but a work of art to be created? This shifts everything. Instead of asking, "How can I get what I want?" you begin asking, "How can I become who I am?" Instead of trying to control outcomes, you focus on the quality of your participation in the process. The art of living for Spinoza is the art of understanding yourself so completely that your actions flow naturally from your deepest nature, enhanced rather than constrained by your recognition of the larger whole of which you are a part. This is not self-indulgence, but self-realization in the most profound sense. The realization that your individual self and the cosmic self are not separate entities but different scales of the same fundamental reality. The paradox of effort. Here is one of the most subtle aspects of Spinoza's teaching: the relationship between effort and effortlessness. Your conatus, your essential life force, is pure effort, the striving by which you endeavor to persist and enhance your being. Everything you do flows from this fundamental drive. Yet the highest expressions of human activity often feel effortless. The mathematician solving a complex proof, the artist creating from pure inspiration, the lover expressing genuine affection. These peak moments seem to happen by themselves, without strain or struggle. The paradox resolves when you understand that effortlessness is not the absence of effort, but effort that is perfectly aligned with the nature of what is being attempted. What if the struggle in your life comes not from the absence of effort, but from effort that is misdirected? When you try to force outcomes that contradict the nature of the situation, when you attempt to control variables that are beyond your influence, when you fight against patterns that would naturally support your flourishing, if you understood how to work with them, this creates the experience of struggle. But when your effort aligns with the deep currents of reality, when you learn to work with the grain of existence rather than against it, effort becomes as natural as breathing, as graceful as a river flowing toward the sea. This is what Spinoza meant by acting from your own nature, not the absence of effort, but effort that expresses rather than contradicts your essential being. The democracy of wisdom. Spinoza's philosophy is radically democratic. It does not require special revelation, mystical experience, or access. to hidden knowledge. It requires only the careful use of reason and the patient observation of your own experience. Every person has the capacity to understand the patterns that govern their emotional life. Every person can learn to distinguish between active and passive affects, between adequate and inadequate ideas, between actions that flow from their nature and reactions that are imposed by circumstances. What if wisdom is not the privilege of a few, but the birthright of everyone who is willing to think clearly and honestly about their experience? This does not mean that wisdom is easy to attain or that all perspectives are equally valid. It means that the tools for understanding are available to anyone who is serious about using them. You do not need to believe in special doctrines or submit to external authorities. You need only to trust your capacity for reason and commit yourself to following evidence wherever it leads, even when it challenges your most cherished assumptions about yourself and the world. This democratic quality of Spinoza's philosophy is what made it so threatening to the religious and political authorities of his time. If people can understand the nature of reality through their own rational investigation, what need do they have for priests or kings to tell them what to think and how to live? The same question remains relevant today. The infinite perspective. One of the most radical aspects of Spinoza's vision is his insistence that you must learn to see yourself from the perspective of eternity. This does not mean escaping time or transcending the physical world. It means recognizing that your individual existence, however temporary and limited, participates in patterns that are infinite and eternal. Your thoughts are temporary configurations of intelligence that is itself timeless. Your emotions are temporary expressions of forces that operate throughout the cosmos. Your relationships are temporary manifestations of the fundamental interconnectedness that constitutes reality itself. What changes in how you live when you see your life from the perspective of infinity? This perspective doesn't make your individual concerns irrelevant. If anything, it makes them more significant by revealing their connection to the cosmic processes of which they are a part. But it does change the quality of your concern. You become less attached to specific outcomes and more interested in the quality of your participation in the process itself. You worry less about whether you will get what you want and focus more on whether you are becoming who you are meant to be. You spend less energy trying to control variables that are beyond your influence and more energy aligning yourself with the forces that are naturally moving in the direction of your highest development. This is not detachment, but engagement of the deepest kind. Engagement that is informed by understanding rather than driven by unconscious compulsion. The community of all beings. Spinoza's vision extends beyond human relationships to encompass your connection with all forms of life. If everything that exists is a mode of the same fundamental substance, then your kinship with other humans is just one expression of a more basic kinship with all beings. The tree outside your window, the animal whose life sustains your life, the microorganisms that make your digestion possible, the atmospheric processes that provide the air you breathe. All of these are expressions of the same cosmic intelligence that expresses itself through your individual consciousness. What if your ethical responsibilities extend to the entire community of life of which you are a part? This doesn't require you to become a perfect ecological saint, or to feel guilty about the harm that is inevitable in any form of life that sustains itself by consuming other forms of life. But it does invite you to expand your sense of what constitutes your community, your family, your body. When you truly understand your interdependence with all life, harming the natural systems that support existence becomes as unthinkable as deliberately harming your own organs. This recognition emerges naturally from adequate understanding of your place in the web of relationships that constitute reality. It is not imposed from outside as a moral obligation, but arises spontaneously from clear perception of what is actually the case. Your individual flourishing and the flourishing of the whole Earth community are not separate interests, but different aspects of the same fundamental thriving. The practice of presence. Everything in Spinoza's philosophy comes back to the quality of your attention to what is actually present in this moment. Most of your suffering comes from being elsewhere, lost in memories of the past that you interpret through current fears, or projecting into futures that exist only in your imagination. But your actual life is always happening now. Your breath is happening now. Your heartbeat is happening now. Your capacity for understanding is available now. What becomes possible when you bring the full quality of your attention to what is actually present in this moment? This is not about eliminating thinking about past and future, but about grounding that thinking in present moment awareness rather than using it to escape from present moment reality. When you are fully present, you can think about the past without being trapped by it. You can plan for the future without being anxious about it. You can engage with possibilities without losing touch with actualities. Presence is not a state you achieve, but a quality you cultivate. It develops through practice, the practice of returning your attention to immediate experience whenever you notice that it has wandered into abstract mental territories. This practice is simple, but not easy. It requires the patience to work with the habitual patterns of distraction that dominate most human consciousness. But it is the foundation for everything else that Spinoza's philosophy makes possible. Without presence, understanding remains merely intellectual. With presence, understanding becomes embodied wisdom. The legacy of understanding. The insights you develop through engaging seriously with Spinoza's philosophy do not belong to you alone. Understanding is inherently shareable. Every moment of clarity you achieve, every pattern you recognize, every illusion you see through, these become part of the collective human wisdom that is available to others who are engaged in the same fundamental work of learning how to live well. You do not need to become a teacher in any formal sense. Simply living with greater understanding, making choices from greater clarity, responding to difficulties with greater wisdom, this contributes to the overall quality of human consciousness in ways that you may never know, but that are nonetheless real. What if your individual development is simultaneously a contribution to the development of human consciousness as a whole? This recognition transforms how you understand the significance of your own growth. It is not just personal improvement, but participation in the larger project of human evolution, the gradual development of the species toward greater wisdom, compassion, and understanding. Every person who learns to act from adequate ideas rather than confused ones, who develops the capacity to transform passive emotions into active ones, who recognizes their fundamental interconnectedness with all life. Such a person becomes a resource for others who are working toward the same goals. This is how transformation spreads, not through preaching or persuasion, but through example, through the quiet influence of lives lived with greater understanding and wisdom. Your individual liberation contributes to collective liberation in ways that are subtle but profound. Conclusion: the eternal return to understanding. We have traveled together through the landscape of Spinoza's vision, from the illusion of free will to the reality of cosmic interconnectedness, from the bondage of confused emotions to the freedom that comes through understanding, from the pursuit of temporary pleasures to the cultivation of lasting joy. But understanding Spinoza is not a destination you reach. It is a path you walk, a practice you refine, a relationship you deepen over time. Every day offers new opportunities to apply these insights, moments when you can choose understanding over reaction, presence over distraction, acceptance over futile resistance, joy over mere pleasure, wisdom over mere cleverness. Close your eyes. Breathe. The question isn't, is this true? The question is, what would change one if you lived as if it were? The lens grinder from Amsterdam offers you an invitation to see your life as an opportunity for the universe to understand itself more completely. To find freedom not through escaping the laws of nature, but through understanding them so completely that following them becomes an expression of your deepest joy. This is philosophy as Spinoza understood it. Not academic exercise, but existential practice. Not escape from life, but deeper engagement with life in all its complexity and wonder. If this made something click for you, if it helped you see things differently, or even just pause and feel something real, share it with someone who might need it too, or just let me know in the comments that you were here. Words like these don't belong in a vacuum. They grow when they're shared. This was just the foundation. In our next episode, Spinoza, Advanced Guide to Emotional Liberation Through Understanding, we'll dive deep into the practical mechanics of transformation. You'll discover the exact techniques Spinoza used to transform his own emotional patterns, how to identify the precise moments when you're being controlled by passive affects versus acting from your own nature, the advanced practices that turn philosophical understanding into embodied wisdom. Check the description below for the link to that advanced guide, because understanding these ideas intellectually is just the beginning. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.